Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. I hope that you are all well. And as you can see, this weekend we have had a storm of videos, live streams, and uploads. I just want to say, guys, if you're watching this on recording, or if you're watching it live now, I want to really encourage you. Please do go and check the back catalogue. You are missing out. I have nearly 8 years worth of videos of all kinds of different stuff, live streams, guests, debates, recordings, you name it, it's on there. And so I really want to encourage you to go and look and listen to the back catalogue. This is a sudden return to doing live streams because my ministry and work has meant that I've ended up spending a long time away from the camera and away from the computer. Well, not from the computer, but certainly away from the camera. And so if you do appreciate these live streams, if they're helping you and a blessing to you, then prayerfully, please do consider if you can support the work that I do. But it goes without saying, I'm not looking for any of you to put yourself under a financial burden. So if you can do it with ease and it's not a problem to you, then please do consider becoming a covenant partner. That being said, guys, subscribe if you've not already subscribed, and do share the videos. Feel free to share whatever the videos you've got in whatever circles you want to, but make sure you hit that subscribe button. And also, if you really want to help the channel, say something in the comments, whether you agree or disagree. All I'd ask is you just keep it respectful, even if you do disagree. So my next guest is Chris 2. I don't know who Chris 1 is. I wonder if that's Chris of Speaker's Corner. But he is Chris 2. I'm going to let him introduce himself because he knows himself better than I know him. And he's going to be talking to us about the Talmudic dilemma, or basically Allah copies the rabbis. And so without further ado, let me bring him in.
Oh,
Chris 2, how are you?
I am good. Yeah, so I'm Chris 2 because I streamed with Chris from Speaker's Corner on the Islamic dilemma, and he became Chris 1 and I became Chris 2. So that's where.
Yeah, there we go. You see, there you go. So
but
Speaker's Corner is.
Tea, so.
Are you from Canada or America?
America.
America, and you drink tea?
Yes.
Are you sure you're not Canadian?
Yes, I'm sure. No, coffee is too bitter for me, so.
Coffee's too bitter for everybody. Well, I mean, anyway, you're going to be talking to us about the Talmudic dilemma, I believe.
Yes.
But before we get into that, do you just maybe want to introduce yourself, your channel, your work, and then we'll go into the prayer and we'll begin.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Chris Harvey. I'm going to be presenting on the Talmudic dilemma, which is an argument I came up with when reading the Quran for the first time all the way through. I just kept noticing over and over again rabbinic tales. And I've been studying the Talmud and the Midrash and the Targums for Christian and Jewish conversations. So I've put out a lot of content on Christian history, Jewish history, and the arguments we can use for Jews to come to Christ. A lot of the stuff for the proofs of Jesus. And in doing so, in reading both of them, I was like, oh, that is from the Quran. Oh, this is from the Talmud. Oh, that's weird. And then I spent a month just trying to find as many parallels as I could. And after I hit 100, I was like, okay, I need to sit down and make this into a formal thing. So now I'm writing a book on this topic. I've given this presentation numerous times. I give it 3 times on David Wood's channel. So there might be a number of your audience that's familiar with it from those presentations. And I've been doing apologetics and polemics for about 1.5 years now. I've been studying Islam for about 4 years and been studying Christianity for about 20 years. So, and then I dabble with Judaism, atheism, Hinduism, Buddhism. So most of my content on my channel right now is about this topic. So I have a long series. There's 34 videos on the Talmudic dilemma already on my channel. And then the rest of the channel is mostly Christian focused with a couple things on Judaism. But that will expand outward into the philosophical arguments for God's existence and other things that I'm writing books on. But for my day job, I am a cardiac researcher. So I'm a formally trained researcher that then am using my talents and my education to do research for the ministry, research for the kingdom. So, but I do electrophysiology research, which is pretty fun.
Wow.
So I study the
So
heart.
in other words, this is a smart guy, and if you've got any heart problems, we could also second for discussions on your heart problems. Okay, brilliant. Right, well, we'll get straight into it. Do you just want to start us in prayer by reading the psalm that you
Yes.
picked? Just read it all the way through.
Would you like to pull up my screen real quick? I have it pulled up.
Oh, no. You don't. People don't need to see it. They just need to hear it.
Okay.
So if you just want to read it as a prayer, and then we'll get started.
Yes. So Psalm 116, one of the Hallel songs that they read during Passover. I love Yahweh because he hears my voice and my supplications, because he has inclined his ear to me. So I shall call upon him in all my days. The cords of death encompass me, and the distresses of Sheol found me. I have found distress and sorrow. That I called upon the name of Yahweh. O Yahweh, I beseech you, provide my soul escape. Gracious is Yahweh and righteous, and our God is compassionate. Yahweh keeps the simple. I was brought low, and he saved me. Return to your rest, O my soul, for Yahweh has dealt bountifully with you. For you have rescued my soul from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. I shall walk before Yahweh in the land of the living. I believed when I said, I am greatly afflicted. I said in my alarm, all men are liars. What shall I give to Yahweh in return for all his bountiful dealings with me? I shall lift up the cup of salvation and call upon the name of Yahweh. I shall pray the vows to Yahweh. Oh, may it be in the presence of all his people. Precious in the sight of Yahweh is the death of his holy ones. O Yahweh, surely I am your slave. I am your slave, the son of your maidservant. You have loosed my bonds. To you I shall offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving and call upon the name of Yahweh. I shall pay my vows to Yahweh. Oh, may it be in the presence of all his people, in the courts of all the house of Yahweh, in the midst of you, O Jerusalem. Hallelujah.
And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Amen.
So, do you need me to share screens?
Yes.
If you want to send me through what, there we go.
Yep.
Brilliant. Over to you then, sir. Amaze us with your thoughts. I'll be taking notes here. I might chip in here and there if I feel I've got something that I absolutely need to get off my chest. But otherwise, the floor is yours until you're done.
Right. So this is the abridged version, because the full version is around 12 hours. So this is a lot of content. We're not doing 12 hours. So this is going to be the 1 hour version. It's going to be very, very, very close in snapshot of the argument and some of the parallels. This is my full document. It's around 250 pages already, and I'm still finding new things. So the current count of parallels between Islam and Rabbinic Judaism is around 153 so far. So this is going to expand, and this is slowly becoming the book. I'm writing the book in a separate document, but the source text for the book is all available here, and this is my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. So the key claims of this argument is that the author of the Quran, whether it be Muhammad or someone else, if you're a Muhammad mythicist, but I'm not, so I would say Muhammad, the author of the Quran thought the Talmud and the rabbinic material, specifically the Midrash and the Targums, was actually the Torah. The Torah is only used a handful of times in the Quran, and it's mostly used in Medina. I think he heard oral Torah for the Mishnah and then thought that was just the Torah in general. Especially the way rabbis use the word Torah is very similar to how Muhammad uses the word Torah. So I think he is affirming the Torah, just the wrong Torah. Also, Talmud cannot be a scripture Islamically, nor should it be. We'll go through that. And if you affirm rabbis and the Talmud as Muslims, you're actually undermining the claims of the Quran. And all of this argument shows that the Quran is a man-made document, and I actually have a very deep mathematical Bayesian argument at the end of this, which we may or may not get to show that the Quran is man-made with a 99.999% certainty. And every other argument against the Talmudic dilemma is circular in reasoning. This is the big thing that Muslims don't seem to get, that they're arguing circularity. And then also, even if this is true, even if the Talmud is the word of God, you still have the Talmud contradicting the Quran. And you get a Islamic dilemma version you can do with the Talmud instead of with the Torah, and it's really funny. And whenever I give this presentation with Chris's channel here in a bit, whenever he's undrowned from making his book, I'm going to have some slides dedicated to just that because he's the big Islamic dilemma guy now.
Yeah.
So, what is the Talmud for those who do not know? It is a very large book. It's a little over 1 million words, and it is made up of 2 sections, and there's 2 versions of it. The primary version, the oldest version and part of the Talmud is the Mishnah. It's the oral Torah. It's what Jews believe goes back to Moses at Sinai. And that was started to be compiled in 200 AD, but it finished being compiled in 200 AD. It started being compiled around 300 BC to 200 BC. A lot of the New Testament is actually responding to beliefs within the Mishnah. And you can actually point that out. It's pretty cool. Jesus like dunks on the rabbis all the time. It's pretty cool. But we have that is the authoritative piece. And if you consider any part of the Talmud scripture, it would be that. And then the Gemara is the bulk of the text. The vast majority of the text is the Gemara. That is the debates on the Mishnah and on the Torah. So the rabbis would argue about literally everything. Every opinion, every Bible verse in the Bible has 2 to 7 rabbis talking about it and giving their interpretation of that section. Much of the content of the Quran is actually from this interpretation by the rabbis, not from the Mishnah, not what could be from a prophet, but actually from rabbis themselves, which we'll get through in very explicit detail. But there's a Jerusalem version of it and a Babylonian version of it, and these were completed around 100 to 150 years before the time of Muhammad, and already available in both written text and orally at the time of Muhammad. And there's thousands of rabbis, or hundreds, if not 1,000 plus rabbis, who were involved in making this over the span of like 700 years. It's a very massive project, and it's really interesting to read at times. It has some wild out there, I can't believe you said that things, and it has some like actual good wisdom and knowledge and Bible revelation. It's a good mixture. But this is the overall argument. If you want to like screenshot my argument, this is basically it, this and the next slide. So, premise 1, Islam teaches that binding revelation, what is typically called wahi in Islamic theology, is granted only through prophets, and that no prophets were between Isa and Muhammad. This is known as the Fatra, the prophetic void between Jesus and Muhammad. We get this in Sahih Bukhari, which I'll show in a couple slides. Premise 2, Islam holds that the Jews after Isa were misguided people who corrupted revelation, followed man-made traditions, which is the big one because the Talmud is man-made traditions, and thus were not rightly guided. Premise 3, the Talmud and the early Midrash were written and compiled after the prophetic period, after the Bible was finished, and before Muhammad, by rabbinic scholars precisely during the Fatra. Premise 4, many Quranic stories and motifs closely parallel rabbinic accounts that have no biblical origin, but do appear in these rabbinic writings, oftentimes word for word. This is the largest chunk of the argument that is hundreds of pages of just comparisons between the Quran, Hadith, and Tafsir and the Jewish sources. And I'm going to go through a number of examples with this, but that is like 10 hours of content just going through those parallels. It's so many. And then premise 5, if the Talmudic and Midrashic materials were conceived and created by post-biblical rabbis who were not prophets, because it happened during the period of the Fatra, and who Islam says were also misguided, then the books cannot be a source of divine revelation. And we know exactly who created what, when, where, and how. So we have like an isnad chain of what was made inside of the Talmud. And it says like Rabbi so-and-so said, Rabbi so-and-so said, Rabbi so-and-so said this. And then you can get a rough like time frame of when that rabbi lived. So you can actually get exactly when, where, and how beliefs that happen in the Quran happen in the Talmud. So it's pretty cool. Premise 6, yet these same non-prophetic, corrupted rabbinic sources contain narratives and teachings that appear in the Quran centuries later, which is the big problem. So the conclusion from that is either Muhammad learned these stories from Jews and Christians through either oral traditions or through the written material, which means that Quran contains human-derived material and is not purely divine, which would make Islam false, or Allah preserved and endorsed as divine revelation post-prophetic Jewish traditions produced by a community Islam says was misguided, which contradicts the Quran's own theology of revelation and its critique of Jewish tradition as unguided and as twisting words and as being untrustworthy. So either way,
thus proving Islam false.
Thus proving Islam first. So the final conclusion is if right guidance, Huda, and divine revelation, Wahi, exists only through prophets, then the presence of non-prophetic rabbinic material in the Quran demonstrates that its source must be human transmission, not divine revelation. Thus, Islam is false. So it appears that the Quran is a product of its time, not a product of God. And it's not just that the Quran is copying information that is from rabbis, just from Jews, like previous people who were rightly guided. It's copying man-made false illustrations as if it was true. And it ends up in the Quran, which we'll go through a number of examples, but we have things that are testable, like Mount Sinai being picked up and held over the Jews. Mount Sinai has, of the 3 mountains that could be Mount Sinai, personally believe it's Har Kokom. Of the mountains that could be Mount Sinai, not a single one of them shows evidence of fissures, of slips, of cracks, of any of the things you would expect from rock being cleaved apart. So none of them were picked up and none of them were set back down. Unless you say that he picked it up and set it down in such a way that it caused no damage to anything, then that is hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. But we have multiple stories that are for sure man-made and false that ends up in the Quran that are testable. So, any thoughts on any of that?
No. So far, so good. Following your argument.
Cool. So, what is divine revelation? Now, wahi is a bit of a strange word because in the Quran it is used of like Moses's mother. So we have in Islamic theology, wahi is specifically binding general divine revelation for a people group, typically given through scripture, or it's like a warner. In the Quran, though, wahi just means like secret communication. Just, something being learned. So, like if I whispered to you, that would technically be wahi. So in Islamic theology, it's a different usage of the term. And I'm using the Islamic theology term, not the, Arabic, like casual term, or even the way the Quran uses it. I'm using the way that the Islamic scholars use it. So wahi is divine revelation, which is direct.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in there, which is something actually that Islamic theology does a lot. It takes the Arabic that's in the Quran that's used in a certain way, and then removes it from Arabic grammar or the normal use of the word, and then totally reinvent a new meaning for the word, and then say what that means as a way of getting around the problems that these terms cause for Islamic theology if taken in their normal usage.
Yes. Yeah.
An
Also,
example of
does
that
the same
would
thing with
be
rabbinics.
an example of that would be one of Allah's titles is the inheritor. And the thing is, to say that Allah is the inheritor contradicts that Allah is the owner, because you can't inherit what you own. So they have to remove inheritor from its normal usage, give it a meaning that is not connected to what the word usually means, and then say, well, this is what Allah meant when he said, I am the inheritor. Just an example. Sorry, you triggered something in me there.
It's fine.
I have these moments when I just have to get something off my chest. Please do continue.
Okay, I will. I do the same thing with teaching the Bible. I go down rabbit holes all the time. And Jack Ray, I don't know if you know him, he loves to make fun of me whenever time I go down a tangent. So he started like defending a calculus and just saying I go down tangent lines and making a bunch of stupid nerdy math jokes. Anyway, say I do tangents a lot, and I just did a tangent about tangents. So continuing on, wahi is direct communication from Allah to his prophets. And we get this in the Quran itself. We get it in Hadith. We get it in all sorts of places. We send not before you except men to whom we reveal. This is Surah 16:43. And angels in dreams can also transmit wahi, but never in an ordinary reason like alq or communal tradition. Like you can't have humans invent wahi. We cannot come to ascertain wahi in our own way, because we get this in a variety of places, but it talks about how whenever we didn't have a messenger, humans started to differ, even though we had previously received it, because it was not maintained by prophets, we fell away. So whenever we start using our reasoning about truth, we come to false conclusions. We cannot be rightly guided by it. We need messengers in Islamic theology. So because of that, everything that is in a book, in a kitab, should be from Allah. The problem is, the Talmud is not from Allah, it's from people. So why does it have so much wahi in it? Or at least why does its material appear in the Quran so many times? We get that Isa and Muhammad are the only prophets near each other in Sahih Bukhari 34:42. I am the nearest of all the people to the Son of Mary, and all the prophets are paternal brothers, and there has been no prophet between me and him. So between Jesus and Muhammad, there's not a single prophet. The problem is, if there's something that comes up as a truth or as a revelation, during that period of time, it cannot be from Allah by definition. Anything in the Fatra, there was no new revelation. There was no new wahi being given. But this is also when the Talmud was being written, and especially the Gemara was only written during this period of time, and the Quran is copying the Agita, the illustrations and stories and myths that rabbis invented to explain the Torah. And it's also copying the halakha, the law, but then you could say, oh, well, the halakha goes back to Moses, but the Agita doesn't go back to Moses. So it's copying something that we know for a fact doesn't go back to Moses, which I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. But because of this, we can see that the Talmud cannot be scripture. Not only that, the Jews are also called misguided during this period of time. So this is, it also accuses them of altering scriptures and following rabbis blindly. So like, you should not have any form of truth within the Talmud. And the Talmud itself is not an avenue of truth. It's not like the Bible where it's prophets speaking. This is just debates. If anyone's read any section of it, and we will go through some of it, it's like Rabbi so-and-so says this, that rabbi says that this rabbi is an idiot, it's actually this, and like, oh no, both of them are idiots at this, and the fourth rabbi comes in and is like, no, all of you guys are partially correct, and I think it's a blending of them. So it's like, it's not like this is the truth, and then it goes to the next section, this is the truth, and then it goes to the next section, and that's what the Quran is copying from. A lot of the times, the Quran is copying from a minority position, or from just a random teaching of a rabbi in like Bereshit Rabbah. So it's not copying prophets, it's copying specifically the commentary on the oral law and on the Torah. So we have that this is the first time this happens, and rabbis interpreted the Talmud as non-literal teachings, especially the Gita, which is the myth, like Sinai being picked up, or like Abraham smashing idols. Like those things are in the category of a Gita. They didn't literally happen. They are stories. And we get in Rambam, one of the most authoritative Jews of all time. This does come after Muhammad, but this is how the Ganaim, the people that the rabbis that come after the writing of the Talmud, those people are interpreting the Talmud and saying what the Talmud authors were meaning to say. And this is Rambam and a couple other individuals that are extremely authoritative on the Talmud and are early. These are in the 800s, 900s. The sages speak in riddles and parables, and therefore when they say things that are impossible, they are speaking by way of metaphor and allegory. This is Rambam in his introduction to Perek Helek. And I have left out a bunch of things because Rambam likes to go on long, eloquent paragraphs on topics. But you can read this. This is just like 6 pages that I cut down. And therefore, there are 3 groups. One group understands the words of the sages literally. This is the Talmud, is when he means sages. And they are foolish and arrogant, ignorant. The second group also takes them literally but mocks them. The third group understands that the sages spoke in parables, and he accounts himself as part of this third group. And he even says like, oh, this third group is so few in number, it's not even right to call them a group. But it's like if the sun is counted as a group, it's bright and shining, and it's only one of itself. It doesn't need others to show that its light shines. And he equates himself to the sun, which is pretty funny. But he has the minority view that they are speaking in parables, but he's also the authority on the Talmud, and he just calls the other guys stupid. Likewise, we have other people coming before Rambam who have the same opinion, who are very big leaders in this movement. So Haigon says, Agidic statements are not like received tradition, not like the halakha, not like the Mishnah. Rather, they are what each individual expounded what came to his mind, talking about the rabbis. So the rabbis reading a section of scripture, and he's like, oh, I think it means this. That's what he's talking about. We do not rely on them the way we rely on binding tradition, on halakha, on the law, on the Mishnah. Then Asareh Goran says that these things derive from verses and called Midrash and Agita are umdena, which is basically speculation, and are not relied upon unless supported by reason and scripture. So this shows that the rabbis themselves do not believe that these stories inside of the Talmud are literally true, that they actually happened. They believe that these were invented by the rabbis at the time when they were reading the scriptures. So if the Quran Muhammad recited things in detail, and it's not just like loose parallels, it's not like exactly like word for word at times copying. If they are copying this rabbinic material in such a way and treat them as historically true when they weren't, and they were meant to be false, then those elements are drawn from later human interpretation rather than divine revelation, indicating that Muhammad's knowledge came through ordinary human means, not through prophecy. Thus, Muhammad was a false prophet and spoke in a oral culture that he lived in, and thus Islam is false. So,
just a quick clarifier. The stories that you're referring to here, are they explanatory stories or are they quotes from the Old Testament? So is it the case that these rabbis that you're talking about, like Rambam, are saying that the Old Testament is fiction? Allegory,
not
metaphor,
always.
or is it talking about other stories that are involved, that are covered in the Talmud, that are not in the Old Testament?
Yeah. So for Pelekelek, he is specifically talking about the Talmud. That's what he means by the sages. But there are other places where Rambam likes to allegorize literal things happening in the Old Testament, especially Genesis. So the later on you get in Jewish history, the more and more they step away from the miraculous, and they kind of separate the miraculous side of the Torah and the Tanakh versus the like actual what happened. They're basically allegorizing everything. Like, oh no, he didn't actually create in 6 days. It is, so and so. Oh no, the serpent didn't actually speak. This is just a metaphor. Oh no, Sodom and Gomorrah didn't actually exist. This is just a metaphor. Oh no, God didn't actually come down and eat with Abraham. That's just a metaphor. Oh no, the Red Sea crossing didn't even happen that way. That's just a metaphor. Like, they are turning their own history into literal interpretations, from literal interpretations to metaphoric interpretations. Rambam is doing that generally speaking, but he actually comes like 400 years after Muhammad. At the time of Muhammad, it was actually a mixture, and whether they were meaning it to be metaphorical or they were meaning it to be literal, but it was still interpreted as, oh, I mean, that probably happened, but we know that it's a story from our sage, not from the Torah. The Jews themselves were intelligent enough to know what was scripture and what wasn't scripture.
So it's these second set of stories that are made up by the rabbis. They're their own illustrative stories,
right?
That are made up by the rabbis in their commentary of the Old Testament. It's those illustrative stories that you're saying Muhammad is copying and putting in the Quran.
Right. So, for example, Bereshit
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So a quick example, just so you can see what happens, is like if you read Bereshit Rabbah, which is the big midrash on Genesis. In chapter 8, in the first paragraph, it talks about how Terah or Haran died in the sight of Terah, his father. So that's a verse inside of Genesis 12 or Genesis 11. And in order to explain that verse, it then goes in and it teaches Abraham being an idolater that then went away from it, and then his father was an idol owner and seller. His father Terah was an idol maker that then smashed the idols, and then he was taken away and thrown into a furnace for smashing the idols, and then God rescued him from the furnace, and then that's why he went to Canaan. So to explain why Haran died and to explain why Abraham went to Canaan, instead of just saying, oh, God told him to, they say, oh no, this legendary event happened and that's why it happened. And then that happens exactly in the Quran, word for word, in 2 different surahs. So he takes a rabbinic explanation of, well, why did Haran die? And they just come up with a story. He treats that story as if it's true and as if it's from the Torah.
Yeah, that's
a big
quite
problem.
devastating. That's massive.
Yes.
That's huge.
And it's over 100 of these.
Oh well, I mean, we've known this for a while, but it's good to finally get it presented. So please continue.
Right. As you said, people have known about this for a long time, especially with like the Alexander Romance and other things. But the scale at which it is happening, I don't think most people are aware of. So my main focus of this is to make it into a formalized argument, and then also to show the scale, which is at least 153 beliefs and doctrines and stories. So like all of their eschatology, all of their practices, all of the prophet tales, all like it is so overwhelmingly rabbinic, it's kind of embarrassing. So the main argument I get from Muslims is whenever I'm giving this presentation, well, the Talmud just copies the Quran. It's not the Quran is copying the Talmud, it's the Talmud is copying the Quran. Because we get this actually in Jewish sources later on in history. We get syncretism happening between the Jews and Muslims in the golden age of Islam, especially during like the period of Rambam. We get a lot of like Perk Rabbi Eliezer. That is very Islamic, extremely Islamic, crazy amount of Islamic. It's also compiled after Muhammad and after Islam already had a foothold in the area in the 800s and 900s. So even some of its material comes before Muhammad. Most of its material is probably influenced by Islam. So we have, but we can tell the difference between what is before Muhammad and what's after Muhammad based on the loan words in the Jewish text. So whenever you look at the influences of text, you can always tell what culture they came from based on the languages used within it. The Quran has hundreds of loan words, mostly Jewish or Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and Old Persian, and also some Sabiotic and Himyaritic words. So you have like a mixture, and they also have Greek words in it too. So you have a mixture of words all over the Arabian Peninsula and Babylon and up in the Levant. The Talmud, on the other hand, has 0 loan words from Arabic, not a single one. It has no even Arabic syntax. And every single Jewish work that post-dates Muhammad has both loan words and Arabic stylized syntax for its Aramaic, which is just like, that's like a nail in the coffin. Like, oh yeah, if it has Arabic in it and it copies an Islamic idea, it's likely from Islam, or it was syncretized between the two because they were interacting much. But in the Talmud itself, there's no influences of Arabic, and same with Bereshit Rabbah and Takuma and Jubilees and Second Enoch and Cave Treasures and Pakos Zerahim and Syriac Alexander Romance and the Spiritual Meadow, which is Syriac as well, I believe, by Jacob Sarug. We have all of these texts that are predating Islam by either 100 years or hundreds of years, with some of these, like the Book of Jubilees and Second Enoch, is way before Muhammad. We have all of these stories that are available orally in Arabia, plus you have the Greeks and Persians and all their stories too. You have all that stuff available, and he is copying from it liberally. But we know without a shadow of a doubt that all of this stuff, the only one that's debatable is Takuma, and you could make a case for the Talmud, but every single modern scholar that studies this topic says that it is before Muhammad, usually around the turn of the 500s. And these are all the authors of, these are all rabbis from the 600s, 700s, 800s, and 900s that gives a date range of the closing of the Talmud between 500 and 514. The vast majority of them say 500 or 505 AD, with the death of the last rabbi of the Talmud. So they say, hey, this rabbi dies, and it's actually in the Talmud itself. In Bava Matzia, 86a1, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, this is Judah the Prince, the one who created the Mishnah, and Rabbi Natan are the end of the Mishnah, the last of the Tanaim, and the redactors of the Mishnah. They were the ones that wrote it down and compiled it into a book. Then Rav Asi and Ravina are the end of instruction, the end of the Talmud. They died at 500 AD. So in textual criticism for historical documents to date it, we usually use the lifespan of the authors when they were working, testimony of contemporaries, and the syntax and the language itself. We don't actually use manuscripts all that much, but all the Muslims are like, oh, show me a manuscript of the Talmud before Muhammad. And we have like some fragments from the 600s and 700s, but we don't have any surviving complete copies that they were using in yeshivas because they likely got used until they turned into dust, because these are expensive documents. Like a single Talmud would cost anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million in today's money to produce. There's only a handful of them available at the time in written form. So obviously they're not going to survive until today. But we have very good reasons to believe the Talmud predates the Quran, and if it does, Islam is false. So here is where it gets interesting. Muhammad is called in dozens of places someone who is only reciting things that he hears from other people. In Surah 961, this is the most famous of which, and among them are those who annoy the prophet and say he is only an ear. He actually gained this title of the ear because he would listen to people and then he would just accept what they said blindly as if it was true. That is what his critics said. And that's actually in the Hadith. That's why
I think it's also a title that all of us should adopt for Muhammad. Rather than calling him the prophet, we should call him Muhammad the ear.
Right. Whenever I was first writing this document, I called this the ear dilemma, but I think that would just confuse people. So I named it the Talmudic dilemma, especially because I wanted people to read the Talmud and see how Quranic the Talmud sounds. But yeah, you can just as easily call this the ear dilemma. We also have in Surah 16, Surah 6, Surah 21, and all of these other surahs that everything he's teaching is none other than the fables of men of old. And only a man teaches him. And no, he has invented it. He's but a poet. Like, there are so many times in the Quran itself which accuses Muhammad of stealing from Jews and Christians, which is just amazing. So we actually have this preserved inside of the Quran. And the question is, if the audience of Muhammad thought he was stealing from the Jews and Christians, well, why is that in there? That's the obvious question. Why did his audience accuse him of doing this so much?
Well, I'm sorry to be picky. Okay. I know it definitely accuses him of repeating stories that other people have told, but is it maybe I've missed something? Are there any particular verses that say, yeah, you heard this from Jews or Christians? I know there's some hadiths that suggest that he did, or leave open very clear possibility that he did. But I'm not aware of any verse that makes that explicit statement, and that's just why I'm pushing back on that comment, because I don't want you to. I'm wondering if you're over.
We have one.
Go on.
Surah 7. I believe it's Surah 7, 137, where it calls him the Ummi, the unlettered prophet. That section is saying, oh, well, the proof of the Quran is that he is unlettered. He couldn't read these stories, that he's able to recite it to you in the same way that the Jews and Christians are reciting it. So he is incorporating Jewish and Christian legends as he's hearing them in the oral culture. The people are saying, oh, this is just what they are talking about. And he says, and his defense of that is, no, I can't read it. Therefore, how could I know about it? And it's in pure Arabic. Those stories are recited in Hebrew and Aramaic. What I'm reciting is in Arabic. How could that happen? So
and
his
in that passage, it mentions
evidence,
people of the book.
Yes. His evidence for it is
satisfied.
That. Yeah.
Satisfied. I am satisfied. Yeah. Please carry on.
So the Quranic wording itself actually mirrors the rabbinic formulations much more closely than the Bible. I'll go through one example with Joseph. Much of the content in Surah 12 on Joseph, Surah Yusuf, is not actually from the Bible. It's from Syriac and it's from the Jews. And we'll go through that in detail in this presentation. And it becomes quite embarrassing the more and more you look at it. Like, the more detailed you get in this problem, the worse it gets. So we don't want to talk about generalities, which it's true that it's generally stolen, but whenever you get to the specifics, it becomes shocking how clear it is. And AP and David Wood just did a stream, and David opened it up with talking about the Syriac Alexander romance, and it's only 18 pages, but every single page of the Alexander romance relates to the dual Qarnayn story of the Quran, including the fact he's named the two-horned one, because in that story, in the Syriac, he is specifically called two-horned, and God gave him the two horns.
And there are coins showing Alexander the Great with two horns.
Right, yeah. So the more details you get in each of these stories, the more obvious it becomes. So we need to actually get some detailed stories. I'll do that for one of them just because it is too long to do it for several of them. But how did he actually get the material? Most likely from oral means. Not only because he's only ever quoting it verbatim once, and that's Surah 532. Everything else is close at times, but he adds details or he forgets details. Like he forgot the name of Jonah. He just says, "Hey, the dude was swallowed by a fish," and he forgets like the names of the women. He forgets the places. Sometimes like he forgets a lot of details, but he's getting the gist of what happens. It's like if you heard a story a bunch of times and you tried to retell it from memory. It's essentially what the Quran sounds like. So we have an oral retelling rather than a written. And then you also have the fact that the written books were not very accessible. There's only a few of them that existed at this time. Now there's hundreds later on in history, but right now there's only a few of them. And they would be far too expensive for Muhammad to afford, even though his wife was wealthy. She was wealthy in relation to her culture, not wealthy enough to like own a Talmud in and of itself. So unless he stole it from like he robbed a Jew, he would not have had access to the written material other than like maybe leaflets. And he copies from some sources more than other sources. So he may have had like a copy of like Sanhedrin or Rosh Hashanah or like Bereshit Rabbah, but even then those by themselves, those tractates in that midrash would still be like tens of thousands of dollars just by itself. So he likely heard all of this through oral means, and then the translations like, okay, if I am fluent in multiple languages, I'm multilingual, I can translate German to English to Latin to all these things. You can translate pretty easily in your mind. So the accusation of like whenever it says like, oh, you're only taught, like only a man teaches them, and his response is, no, this is in clear Arabic. That man is teaching in Hebrew, I'm teaching in Arabic, therefore it couldn't have been like from the dude. But if you're multilingual, that's an irrelevant comment. Both illiteracy doesn't matter if it's orally spoken, and Arabic doesn't matter if it's orally spoken. You can just mentally translate it. So,
do you not think it's? It's obviously that he traveled around as a. If you take the Islamic stories
the caravans,
at face value, he went on trading journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And he wouldn't have been a successful trader if he couldn't at least speak a broken form of another language. Am I stealing your thunder? Is this something you're going to say?
Yeah. Muhammad was almost certainly multilingual in the 5th and 6th or 7th century CE. Traders in Arabia were commonly used Arabic, Aramaic, Syriac, Greek, and Persian, and even South Arabian dialects like Syriac, Emiratic, and Ge'ez. And if he's a merchant, he should be able to speak those languages at least to a working level, because you have to do commerce, and commerce you have to be very specific.
But also, the other traders in the region are going to be able to speak Arabic.
Correct.
So even if he couldn't speak, even if he couldn't speak their language, a lot of the traders would have been able to speak his. And so, it really does get it. Really is a pretty solid point we can rest on. So I take it you're ruling out the possibility of an editing team coming in later to the Quran and adding stories from the Talmud. You're dismissing that possibility.
I don't actually dismiss that possibility. I think that would be the least likely, but we do absolutely see evidence of that within the text itself. Like in Surah 96, it was obviously edited after the fact. Like I think Ayah 8 through 12 was inserted later on because the flow breaks. If you take from 7 to 13, it actually fits quite easily. It's like John 8 being added. You can clearly tell it was added from 751
the whole of the
to
Quran is a cut
813.
and paste work.
It is.
The whole of the Quran, it's got that. It's got those signs all over it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But the Islamic,
you could
but the Islamic story is, the Islamic story kind of allows for that if because it's written down on bones and palm leaves and stones, and then someone starts putting it together, and there's these different editings, and it happens like 3 or 4 times. So the Islamic story could account for all that clear editing work. Okay, so you don't
think because we have ideas about that too.
Okay. I mean, I'm quite sympathetic to the idea that he heard it rather than that a later editing team came in and rehashed the Quran completely. That's more Jay's line of logic. Anyway, please continue. I don't want to keep you off your material for too long.
It's okay. So I would say it's definitely oral. If not later, also later edited. But I would definitely say that Muhammad, the original author of the Quran, was influenced heavily by these sources and had access to it from the trade routes. Because we also know loosely where he went. He went up to the Levant, he went down to Yemen, and he maybe went east to Babylon, because those would be the trading hubs. All three of those places that two of which he went to, one of which he speculative went to, all three of which are the centers of rabbinic thought at the time. So everywhere he's going and interacting with, those are like where the yeshivas are, the schools of Talmud. One of which is Surah. So Yathrib, Medina, that had a yeshiva in it. So he's going to a place like he even moved to a place that had a Talmudic school. That's what a yeshiva is. Yeshiva is a school that teaches Talmud. So he went to a city that for sure had a yeshiva, and he may have also gone to Surah, because Surah is a word that appears in the Quran for the first time in Arabic. It likely has a Semitic history inside of Syriac.
Yeah.
Which in Syriac, it kind of loosely relates to sutra, and it comes for the word for scriptures. Here in the city it's a Babylonian city of Surah actually had written Talmuds. So if he actually went there, he could have read a written Talmud in his hand, which might be also why he says you separate out the Torah into pieces, because the Talmud itself is written out into pieces. It has 63 sections to it. So you might be condemning the Jews for doing that. Not its own theory, not really related to this, but kind of.
But also, he lived amongst Medinan Jews. Yes. That's according to Islamic sources. He clearly was able to communicate with them. So either they were speaking Arabic, or he was able to speak some common language with them. And living amongst a bunch of people for a couple of years, or even just a couple of months, you're going to be able to absorb a lot from what they teach and what they say. It's not like they had the internet in those days, or cinema, or many other distractions. And so what you're going to talk about, you're going to talk about stuff like religion. So it's more than possible for him to have absorbed a lot of Jewish stories just from Medina, even without traveling.
Right. Even without the trade routes. But with the trade routes, I think it becomes almost a certainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, what does the Quran actually say about the Torahs? And the Injil is related to this as well, because the Injil includes stories from the Gnostic scriptures, but it counts it as basically part of the Injil. So the Torah, in the usage within the Quran, I think it's only used 12 times, and 11 of those times is in Medinan surahs. And then the only one that's in Mecca is in Surah 7, and that might have been an insertion from Medina. We're not entirely clear. But in Medina, he gets revelation of the name Torah and the name Gospel. He found out what those even were, because I don't think he actually knew what those were when he was writing in Mecca. But we have all over the Quran that it's confirming the Torah over and over and over and over again. Whenever he didn't know about the word Torah, he would just say either what's already with you, and this is, obviously in Medina, but in the Meccan surahs where it says, hey, I'm confirming what of the prophets was given to you. I'm confirming what's in the kitab. I'm confirming what's in the book. He does that, I think it was 19 times explicitly. He's confirming just the book or the scriptures given to you, what's in your hands. And then it's over 140 times that he's confirming the Torah and the kitab given to Abraham, the kitab given to Moses, the kitab given to David and the prophets. Over and over and over again, it's confirming these things. So I think he's actually confirming the Talmud. He's not confirming the Torah. He's confirming what he thinks is the Torah, but he's confirming the Talmud. And he thinks that the Talmud is literally scripture. So he's like, hey, I'm doing a really good job. I'm doing a great job confirming this book using the rabbinic sources, but he doesn't realize the rabbinic sources are not actually scripture. So he's very faithfully describing what's within the Talmud. But the problem is he's not actually, it's not actually in the Torah. We also see this in Surah 5:44. Indeed, we revealed the Torah containing guidance and light by which the prophets who submitted themselves to Allah made judgments for Jesus. So too did the rabbis and scholars judge according to Allah's book, with which they were entrusted and with which made keepers. I think this translation is all over the place whenever you look at the English. But this word for keepers, I think it's also translated as witnesses. and they are the ones who are the custodians of the Torah. So it mentions rabbis by name, it mentions the Torah, and it mentions that they are the custodians of it. And he says, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, such people are unbelievers. So the Quran is asserting that the rabbis were judges both over the Jews and over the Torah itself. The rabbis kept the Torah pure. They kept the Torah available for the Jews to be judged by. So this gets into the Islamic dilemma and like, oh, the Quran actually is confirming the books that were with them, and it does not actually think that they were corrupted. So what Torah did the rabbis have? Well, if you read the rabbinic writings, Torah is whatever they want it to be. How a person poops is Torah. How a person has coitus is Torah. How a person sneezes is Torah. How a person reads the Torah is Torah. So they use the word Torah for everything. And they also talk about the Torah in using Torah. They also talk about the Tanakh, the general Old Testament, the prophets, the writings, as Torah. And they talk about the Mishnah as Torah. And they talk about even the Gemara as Torah. So when they say Torah, they mean everything Jewish. And the rabbis are keepers of everything Jewish. I think he just misinterpreted what they meant, which is really, really funny. We actually get a comparison between the Talmud and the Torah inside of the Quran itself in multiple places. So in Surah 5:45, we get, and we prescribed, we ordained for them life for life, eye for eye, nose for nose, ear for ear, tooth for tooth, for retaliation for injuries. This word for retaliation, according to Ibn Kathir, is in relation to blood money and paying back what you owe based on the damages you incurred. And in Baba Kama 83b, we get that whoever injures someone is to pay monetary compensation. And how are you to tell what the monetary compensation was? It would be the price of a slave if they're sold in the slave market. If it is reduced, that is how much you are to pay the person for their injury. So if I like cut you, and it's a deep cut, and like, oh, I wouldn't buy, like, I'd buy a slave for this much money if they had that injury versus a slave who's healthy. And that difference in price is how much you pay them for the medical costs and everything else. This is not biblical. The biblical is a more of a literal thing where you are actually eye for eye, tooth for tooth, ear for ear. So he's inserting, and this gets into the Israel a lot, which we'll get to in a little bit. My throat is pain. Okay. He's inserting, Ibn Kathir he's using rabbinic understanding to explain the Quran. And we'll see this in hundreds of places. The tafsir all over the place, especially Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, and Qurtubi, and Jalalain. They are using the rabbinic material, even at times quoting the Talmud, to explain the Quran, which is pretty amazing. The early exegetes, the early scholars of Islam are using rabbis to explain their religion. We'll go through some examples of Joseph. It's pretty amazing. But we have that the Quran is claiming that the Talmud is scripture. And the most clear example of this is Surah 5:32. For that reason, we decreed, we issued, we gave forth, we commanded, we gave revelation for the children of Israel. And this is for the Jews. So this is Allah giving scripture to the Jews that whoever kills a human being for anything other than manslaughter or corruption on the earth, which Muhammad added this bit, that's not in the original, but he is, he's using that to justify all sorts of wickedness. It will be as if he had killed all mankind, and whoever saves the life of one person, it will be as if he saved the life of all mankind. Now notice this is not for the Muslims, it's only for the children of Israel. Then, you get 2 verses later, what happens for the Muslims, they are to go slaughter and subjugate people. But this comes straight out of the Mishnah. It comes out of Sanhedrin, and I have the Talmud's version of it from Sanhedrin 37a:13. Therefore, Adam, the first man, was created alone to teach you that with regard to anyone who destroys one soul from the Jewish people, i.e. kills one Jew, the verse describes him, blame as if he destroyed an entire world, and as Adam was one person from whom the population of an entire world would come forth. Conversely, anyone who sustains one soul from the Jewish people, the verse describes to him credit as if he sustained an entire world. We also get this in Avot Di Rabbi Natan 31:2 in the Mishnah. This appears twice in the Mishnah. And according to Gabriel St. Reynolds and a variety of other scholars, this is the only time in the Quran that Muhammad is actually intending to quote something. So this is the only quotation in the Quran, and it just so happens to be a quotation not of the Bible, but of the Mishnah, of the rabbinic post-biblical material, post-prophetic material. So Allah is quoting the Talmud and calling it scripture. And then we also have this description of a donkey carrying books inside of Surah 62:5. The comparison of those who entrusted with the Torah, so the Torah specifically, yet do not apply it, is as if the comparison of the donkey carrying books. Now, Muhammad is using this as a polemic, and in the actual Talmud, it's actually seen as like a good thing. A person should always make himself subjugated to the matters of Torah, like an ox to a yoke, and like a donkey to a burden. Specifically, a burden of books is the idea. And then you have this yoke of Torah language being applied. So we have a donkey carrying the Torah, or donkey carrying books, being used of rabbis who study the Torah because they are so subjugated to it that they're lowering themselves to the point that they're a donkey, and they are humbly carrying the burden of the great work of being a rabbi, because the rabbis pat themselves on the back literally all the time in the Talmud. There's all sorts of crazy stories about them. And David, one of my favorite stories, Bob's not here so I can tell the story. One of my favorite stories in the Talmud is of they change all of the prophets and the kings to be way more sinless. This is like the Isma doctrine. It's also Jewish. And one of the stories of David, it says that David would used to hang a harp on his bedstand and leave his window open at night, so that God at midnight would blow a wind in through his window and play the harp for him as an alarm to wake him up to then study the Torah. So we have David having the first alarm system, like he has an alarm clock, that God miraculously plays for him every day, so he wakes up in the early morning to study Torah and then go be king. So interesting people, the rabbis. Anyway, and it's not just that the Quran is copying this, as I mentioned earlier, the Tafsir and Hadith do, and all of Islam. So it's Sirah, Tafsir, Hadith, Quran, all of it, even Sharia, because the fourfold division of Sharia matches the fourfold division of the Halakha. All of Islam is copying the Jews. It's pretty amazing. So here are some cognates in borrowed theology, a number of which is just pretty obvious, like Satan and Satan, Jannah and Jan Eden, which is the Garden of Eden. This is heaven, paradise. Gehenna, obviously from Gehenna. And you have like Nabi, Navi, Iman and Iman, Din, Din. Like some of these are super obvious. Other ones are just like the same roots, like Murqa and Quran for recite, or Kire for to like read. And a mosque and a masjid and a masjid, or the place of prostration. This would also be used of synagogues in Himyar, in modern day Yemen, where his nurse was from. So we have, like, if you call your place of worship a mosque, in a way, you're kind of calling it a synagogue, and that is hilarious to me. And then also the madrasas, the schools of religious learning, that comes from Bet Midrash. So it's not just that their words are Jewish, the theology itself is Jewish, and it's not just like casual cognates. It's not like the difference between yom and yom, like day and day. It's not, or like it's not casual Semitic similarities because they just have the same triliteral root system. Actually, no, it's entire made up terms that only exist because the rabbis invented them. Those terms appear in the Quran, and it's not Arabic. So when the Quran says, oh, it's only in pure Arabic, there's a lot of non-Arabic terms in the Quran, but there's terms in the Quran that are from Aramaic and Hebrew and Syriac that rabbis and Christians invented, which is pretty amazing. It's again post-biblical. It's not by a prophet. One of which is Shekhinah. Shekhinah is not a word that appears inside of the Bible. The root appears inside the Bible to be present with something, shaka, but Shekhinah is not from the Bible. It is a made-up word by rabbis to describe the presence of God, We actually have this story from Sota, which we'll go through in a second. But Surah 48:26, Surah 48, Shekhinah only, or Sakana, as it is in Arabic, that appears, I think, 6 times in the Quran, 3 of which is just in Surah 48. And this verse in Surah 48 is actually almost like copied from Sota 48b, which I think is hilarious. Because Surah is 5 letters, and you have a 48 and a 2 and a 6. And you have Sota, which is 5 letters, a 48 and a B for like 2 and 6. So it's almost the exact same word, and you have like 3 letters being exactly the same. Really funny. It's obviously coincidence, but I think it's like God like laughing about the situation. Anyway, pretty fun. Shekhinah here. When those who disbelieve had set up zealotry in their hearts, the zealotry of the age of ignorance, then Allah sent down his Shekhinah upon his messenger and upon the believers and imposed on them the word of self-restraint, for they were worthy of it and they were suited for it. And Allah is aware of all things. So this phrase here and the Shekhinah come from Sota 48 among other places as well. So from the time of when Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi died, the divine spirit, or the spirit of prophecy, the Shekhinah, departed from the Jewish people, as these 3 were considered to be the last prophets. For on one occasion, the sages were reclining in the upper story of the house of Gura in Jericho. A divine voice from heaven was issued to them, and it said, so this is the prophetic voice, there's one person among you for whom it is fitting that the divine voice, or the divine presence, the Shekhinah, should rest upon him as a prophet. There's one among them that is fitting to be a prophet, but his generation is not fit for it. They do not deserve to have a prophet among them. So they're not fit for it, and they're unworthy. So here we have that the Shekhinah is sent down to Muhammad. He becomes a prophet because his generation was worthy of it, and they were suited for it. They were fit for it, and they were worthy of it. This is the exact opposite. So he's taking this idea from the Talmud, and he's saying, no, the divine voice did rest on me because he's the unlettered prophet, which is actually prophesied within the Talmud, because the Talmudic is an end times book, has a lot of eschatology in it, including that prophecy will return at the last time before the Messiah comes. Oh, I wonder what Muhammad said of himself. Anyway, we have the exact flipping of it. He says, yeah, the divine voice rested on me because I was fit to be the prophet. I was fit to be the seal of the prophets, which comes from Manichaeism. And we have their generation wasn't. This is talking about Hillel. So, and this is what begins in Sanhedrin 11. The same story is repeated, and it says the sages set their eyes on Hillel, the elder, trusting that he was the one indicated by the divine voice to be worthy to be the prophet. And then he dies, and they say, alas, the pious man, alas, the humble man, a disciple of Ezra. I actually think this is the origin of where Ezra is the son of God, which I get to. Bob's not here. I'm sure he'd ask a question on that. I might be able to explain that real quick. But this is straight from that, as is Shekhinah in general. So the fact that this word appears in the Quran itself disproves the Quran, because Quran says it's in pure Arabic, and it also disproves it because this is a rabbinic term that is only invented by the rabbis to explain a theological thing that they themselves invented, because they can't have theophanies because they denied that God physically came to the universe. So to explain away God physically coming to the universe, they actually invented the idea of a divine presence, which is separate from God, but still serves as an intermediary for God, in the same way that the Islam uses the Shekhinah. For those who are interested in the disciple of Ezra stuff, the word here is Talmid, Talmid, or Talmide of Ezra. So Talmide is like the student of, and Ezra is just Ezra. In the Bible, in the New Testament, we actually have, if you were to translate the Greek of Matthes into Hebrew, you would get the Talmid, the student of Yeshua. So Jesus says, if you are my disciple, if you are my Talmid, you will listen to my voice, in John 8. The early Christians were called in Hebrew Talmid Yeshua. You would be the disciple of Yeshua. You'd be the apostle of Yeshua. Bob, I can't pull up comments. It's pretty sad, but Bob said that his computer crashed, and this is hilarious. I'm watching this with the rest of you. Also, I can't end the stream, so if he doesn't come back in the next 2 hours, I'll just keep going. Why not? Anyway, so we have that this is the Talmud of Yeshua, and the idea within the rabbinic writings is that the students follow their rabbis so closely that the dust of the rabbis get on the bodies of the students. So we have, and in the Christian context, the disciples of Christ believed Christ was God. And then in the rabbinic context, the disciples of someone follows along with the rabbi very, very, very closely, so much so that there's even a story of one student sitting under the bed of another rabbi as he's having coitus with his wife to learn how to do it with his wife. Pretty crazy. Anyway, then of course the other guy's like, "What are you doing under there? Get out of here!" And he's like, "Oh, but master, it is Torah, and I must learn," which is one of my favorite quotes from the Talmud. Anyway, this might be the origins of the Son of God stuff for Ezra. This mixed with a couple other statements of the Talmud. You actually make a case for that being from the rabbinic sources. It's a much weaker case than a lot of these other ones, but you could still make a case for it. I still think Muhammad is really stupid in that. But beyond Shekhinah, you also have a bunch of terms that first appear with the rabbis, like shirk, coming from shetef, as we see right here. So the minimum here is those who are heretics, those who are essentially kafir. And we have shutef. These are people who are saying that God has a partner associated with him, specifically a partner in the acts of creation, which is what the Hebrew says here. So we have, yes, I have it in English right here. Adam, the first man, was created on Shabbat Eve at the close of the 6 days of creation. And for what reason was this so? So that the heretics will not be able to say that the Holy One, blessed be he, had a partner in the acts of creation. Well, what is shirk? It is saying that Allah has a partner specifically in running the world and creating the world. And this is the same belief. So even shirk, the worst sin in Islam, comes from the rabbis. You also have the same thing with anyone who's linking the name of heaven with something else. You're uprooted from the world. This is again shetef. So, also kafir. You have this is from kofar in the Hebrew, and it literally means to deny or to disbelieve in something. So, like the disbelievers or the deniers, it's the same root. And then in the later rabbinic period, by the time of like Rambam, they actually classify this as a theological stance that you're the kofar ben echar. Pretty cool. So this is just straight up an apostate or heretic. And then we have in Sanhedrin this very specific phrase of the sages taught in a Brita, he denied he was a kafir, the resurrection of the dead. This is a very big thing inside of the Quran. You even have a whole surah on the resurrection of the dead. And if you deny the resurrection, you are a kafir going to hell. And therefore, he will not have a share in the resurrection of the dead, as all measures dispensed by the Holy One, blessed be he, to his people are dispensed measure for measure, and a response to his commensurate action, or commensurate with the action. This gets into judgment and theology and eschatology and all that stuff, which is deeply rabbinic. I have a list of things that are stolen, which we'll get to towards the end. But let's get through a single detailed example, because it's not going to click until you go through one example. I like Solomon talking to the Queen of Sheba and the ants of Surah 27. That's a good one. Abraham smashing idols is another really good one because they claim to be an Abrahamic religion. So showing that is also from not Allah, but from people is pretty impressive. Jacob is fun because it includes a aspect to the story that is by far really stupid and ridiculous and obviously copied inside of the tafsir. So this is one of my favorites. This is like top 5 obviously stolen things within the Quran. And we have in Bereshit Rabbah 91 and in a couple other places the story of Jacob and the story of Joseph. And we will compare this in great detail for the next like 20 minutes. And by the end of it, you're going to be like slapping, like, how in the world did people not see this for so long? It's pretty incredible. So Jacob said to his sons, why do you make yourselves conspicuous? Jacob said to his sons, you are mighty and handsome. Do not enter through one gate and do not stand in one place so that the evil eye will not have dominion over you. When Jacob's sons came, each and every one entered through his own gate, and they wrote their names. We are sincere. However, this is what our father commanded us to do. Do not enter through one gate. So this is later on whenever they get caught by the gatekeepers. I cut out a couple pages just to see that it is again repeated that they do not enter through one gate. Well, In the Quran, it has a very similar thing in Surah Yusuf 67. And he said, "Oh, my sons, do not go in by one gate, go in by different gates. I cannot help you in any way against Allah. Indeed, the decision rests with Allah alone. In him do I put my trust, in him let all the trusting put their trust." So we have the do not enter by one gate. We also have the mention of the evil eye. Well, in Islamic theology, the evil eye is everywhere. It's very important. And it's actually all over the tafsir, including Ibn Kathir, Tabari, and Jalalain. So when we look at how they talk about Surah Yusuf 67, Allah says that Yaqub, peace be upon him, ordered his children when he sent Benjamin with them to Egypt to enter from different gates rather than all of them entering from one gate. Ibn Abbas, Muhammad bin Qayyab, Mujahid, Ad-Dahak, Qataha, As-Sudi, and several others said that he feared the evil eye for them. So you have all of these reciters, including Ibn Abbas. And this one is extremely important because Ibn Abbas and Abu Huraira are the main transmitters of Israelites' beliefs inside of Islam. So Ibn Abbas is obviously a very early, important person within Islam, one of the Sahaba, one of the followers of Muhammad. We have Ibn Abbas here giving Jewish understanding of the Quran. So Ibn Kathir is quoting Ibn Abbas as his authority as to why they entered through different gates. It's because he feared the evil eye for them. Well, that's not in the Quran. Where is he getting it from? Huh. And whenever we go through more of these, it's going to become way more obvious. So At-Tabari also has, because they were handsome and well-built men. Again, from here. Not from here. From here. And he feared the evil eye upon them if they entered as a group through one gate, being the sons of one man. We also have, I forgot to mention this up here, he feared that people might direct the evil eye at them because the evil eye truly harms by Allah's decree and brings down the mighty warrior rider from his horse. They believed that if you lusted after a person with your eye, you're actually going to harm them either spiritually or physically. Like they could die from having too many people lust after them with the eye. This is a very Jewish belief. Have you ever seen the symbol with the, like the, I can't do it. The hand symbol with the eye in the middle that's on a lot of Jewish necklaces and pendants and all that stuff, that's the evil eye. And they wear that to like prevent the evil eye. But Islam also has that evil eye theology in it, and that's from the Jews. We also see this in Jalalain. He said, "Oh, my sons, don't enter Egypt by one gate, but enter by separate gates, lest the evil eye smite you." That's literally, lest it kills you. So, might I write a book on this? I am, in fact, already writing a book on this. It's about 200 pages, and I hopefully will have that out end of this year. If not this year, the next year. I'm also working on a couple websites for the kingdom to destroy Islam. So who knows? But going back to Joseph, we have a series of things I'm not actually including like Joseph being sold into slavery. The wolves motif inside the Quran comes from the Syriac, from Jacob of Sarug, from Surah Narsai. We have a bunch of things that I'm omitting from Joseph's story. Joseph's story is massive, and it's all stolen. All of Surah 12 is stolen from Syriac and from the Jews. So Bereshit Rabbah 86.3 has the official of Pharaoh that he was castrated. This is why Potiphar was castrated. This teaches that Potiphar purchased Joseph only for intercourse, but the Holy One must be castrated him. He castrated Potiphar. This is analogous to a she-bear that was killing its master's children. He said, break its teeth. So break the teeth of Potiphar. So it teaches that Potiphar purchased him only for intercourse, and the Holy One must be castrated him. Why is this relevant? Because Joseph in the Quran is extremely beautiful. In the tafsir, he's so beautiful, he makes women swoon just by walking down the street and like fall over. And the Bible, it just says that he is like very nice to look at. Him and Rebecca have this very specific phrase in Hebrew of miod mata, or ra, like exceedingly visually pleasant, instead of like ifa, like beautiful. So you have this exceedingly visually beautiful man who was well-built and handsome. That's how he's described in the Bible. The rabbis really expanded upon that to the point where every single person, man, woman, and child, wanted to sleep with Joseph. That introduces itself in Islam. But we get this in Bereshit Rabbah. Again, his master's wife cast her eyes, for it is written prior to this matter, Joseph was of fine form and of fine appearance. That's all that the Bible says of him. And then they add all this other nonsense to it. This analogous to a mighty man who was standing in the street, grooming his eyes, curling his hair, and lifting his heels to like lift up his buttocks. He said, "This is appropriate for me, becoming for me, for I am fair and mighty." They said to him, "If you are mighty, if you are fair, there's a she-bear before you. Arise and attack it." So we have Potiphar's wife being a very beautiful woman, and Joseph going in and be like, "Hey, yo, I could, but I'm not going to because he's a pious man." But that's actually part of the story as well, which we'll get in Sota 36b, 11 through 14. Now, the rabbis didn't want any of their prophets, any of their patriarchs to be sinful, so they made all of them sinless. This is one of the ways that they made Joseph sinless, was they actually made it to where he was tempted to sin, but then didn't by the direct intervention of God himself. So Rabbi Yohanan says, this teaches that both Joseph and Potiphar's wife stayed in the house as they intended to perform a matter of sin. They intended to have intercourse. And I cut out a couple paragraphs. One says he entered the house in order to fulfill his sexual needs with her. And then, so I'm just cutting out the rabbis' different opinions on it. That day was their festival day, and they went out to the house of idol worship, all the people of Egypt. And she stayed behind with Joseph just in her house. She told him that she was sick and could not go, as she said to herself, "I have no day on which Joseph will attend to me like this day where he's alone with her." The verse states, "And she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' At that moment, his father's image came and appeared to him in the window." This is what I was mentioning earlier. So they take a verse of the Bible and then they expand on it. So it's like, this is what the Bible says. This is what I think of happened within that. And it gives the rabbi that is teaching it. So this is from Johannes. This is not from Moses. This is from Rabbi Yohanan. This is not from a prophet. Whenever we look at it in the Quran, in the tafsir, it becomes like, wow, wow. So at that moment, his father's image came and appeared to him in the window. The image said to him, "Joseph, the names of your brothers are destined to be written on the stones of the ephod, and you're to be included among them. Do you desire your name to be erased from among them and to be called an associate of promiscuous women?" Immediately his bow abated, or he got hard. Rabbi Yohanan says, in the name of Rabbi Meir, this means that his bow returned to its strength as he overcame his desire. The verse about Joseph continues, "And the arms of his hands were made supple," meaning that he dug his hands into the ground and his fluid was emitted between his fingernails. Now, as gross as that is not something you would just come up with. That's not something that is just like a casual coincidence if this so happens to appear in the Islamic sources. That is something that like no other human in history thought of. What in the world are you talking about that the man dug his fingers into the earth and impregnated it? What? But if we look at the Muslim sources, we see in Surah 12, 23-24, "And she, in whose house he was, asked him to do an evil act. She bolted the doors and said, 'Come,' he said, 'I seek refuge in Allah. Indeed, he is my Lord, who has treated me honorably. Indeed, wrongdoers never prosper.' She indeed desired him, and he would have desired her." So he desired her. He wanted to have intercourse with her, and yet he didn't. If it had not been that he saw the argument of his Lord, this is not described in the Quran what the argument was, but it is in the tafsir. It was this way to show, and it was this way so that we might ward off evil from him and lewdness. So there was an argument that God sent him that kept him from being lewd. Indeed, he was one of our chosen slaves. And then Ibn Kathir and Jalalain makes this extremely explicit. Well, what is this desire that he had, and what was the argument from his Lord? As for the evidence that Yusuf saw that moment, there are conflicting opinions as to what it was. Ibn Jarir at-Tabari, so he's quoting al-Tabari, said, "The correct opinion is that we should say that he saw an ayah from among Allah's ayah that repelled the thought that crossed his mind. This evidence might have been the image of Jacob, his father, or the image of an angel, or a divine statement that forbade him from doing that evil sin. There are no clear proofs to support any of the statements in specific, so it should be left vague as Allah left it." So again, we have the image of Jacob, as happened here. The image of his father appeared and then, told him, "Hey, don't do it." We have the image of Jacob coming and forbidding him from doing the sin. Then Ibn Kathir says, oh, well, there's a bunch of commentaries on it, and it's just one of the options. But even the fact that this is an option shows that the tafsir are incorporating rabbinic ideas into the text. And Jalalain is way more explicit with this. Ibn Abbas, again, Ibn Abbas, said Jacob was made to appear before him, and he struck his breast. Upon his desire, withdrew from his body through his fingernails. He did this, and he shut it down, and then he again emitted from his fingernails his baby batter. How in the world did Jalalain come to this conclusion? If he is not taking it from the Talmud, because this is Talmud, if he's not taking it from the Talmud, how in the world did he get that he was emitting baby batter from his fingernails? I ask you now. What? And also, Jacob was made to appear before him. Jalalain is just straight up taking Soda. He's basically paraphrasing Soda 36b here to explain a verse from the Quran, which Ibn Abbas, one of the Sahaba, is using to explain the Quran. Why is Ibn Abbas using the Talmud to explain the message of Allah? So, you have that. Joseph's beauty continued. You also have, this is one of the stories that most people are aware of in Surah 12, 30, and 32. And women in the city said, the ruler's wife is asking an evil deed of her slave boy. Indeed, he has smitten her to the heart with love. We see that she is clearly mistaken. And when she heard about their sly talk, she sent to them and prepared a cushioned couch for them and gave every one of them a knife and said, come out to them. And when they saw him, they praised him and cut their hands, exclaiming, Allah is blameless. This is not a human being. This is nothing other than some gracious angel. She said, this is he because of whom you blamed me. I asked an evil act of him, but he abstained. But if he does not do my bidding, he will indeed be in prison. Indeed will be among those who are brought low. This last bit is also in the Syriac sources, but I don't have it in here because, again, brevity. I know why Bob acted out for this part of the presentation. Oh, that's pretty funny. No, he doesn't know that. He didn't see the presentation beforehand. So just so happened to be he wasn't here for the fingers bit. But we get in Midrash, our sages inform us that on one occasion, Potiphar's wife assembled a number of Egyptian women so they might see how very handsome Joseph was. This was in response to them slandering her, saying, oh, she's doing this nonsense with the slave. But before she summoned Joseph, she gave each of them an ethrong, a citrus fruit, and a knife. When they saw Joseph's handsome countenance, they cut their hands. She said to them, if this can happen to you who has only seen him once, how much more so does it happen to me who must look at him constantly? Each day she strove to entice him with words, but he suppressed his evil inclination. So again, the story of cutting your hand with the knife while cutting a fruit on accident because you're so distracted from how hot he is in the rabbinic sources. And it's also, if you read the tafsir on this section, Ibn Kathir says that they had citrus fruits and they cut their hands because they were too infatuated with Joseph's beauty. Pretty amazing. So that is just a segment. That's not even all of Joseph. There's like 4 other things, including like the infancy stuff where there's a baby speaking from the cradle to give judgment between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Like there's so much stuff, even like the garment of paradise being laid on his father's face so he regains his sight. It's from the Syriac. Like all of Surah 12 is from previous sources, mostly from the Jews. But Joseph Witzman, in his PhD dissertation on the Syriac milieu of the Quran, he argues that much of the Joseph tale is also from the Syriac legend, which I agree with wholeheartedly. If you read Jacob Sarug on it, it's only available in Syriac, unfortunately, so you can translate it, or you can spend the time to learn Syriac. But all of that story is just straight up, they're the same. If you mix those two accounts, if you mix the rabbis, the Talmud, the Bishop Rabbah, and the homilies from Jacob, you just straight up get Surah 12. It's pretty wild. But let's go through Judgment Day as well. All of this is just a handful of, this is not everything. This is multiple pages of the Talmud that I'm condensing down into just a couple of quotations. But if you read this section, if you read none of the Talmud after this presentation, only read one section, go read on Sephara.org, Avodah Zarah 2a through 3a. Go read that. This is one of the most obvious sources for the Quran there is, period. You can also read like Bereshit Rabbah chapter 8, Sanhedrin. You can read that. That's a very lengthy document. If you just want to read a little bit and see like, oh yeah, obviously he's stealing from the Jews, read this section. All of Islamic eschatology comes from this book. So I quoted a couple things. All the mitzvah that the Jews perform in this world will come and bear witness for them in the world come. This is like the surah becoming birds and then testifying on behalf of the Muslims. Oh, did you actually fulfill the law that is within me? And then they do all that stuff. So that's there. This demonstrates that the objects of idol worship will serve as witnesses against their worshipers. So idols will be made alive during Judgment Day, and they will testify against the idolaters that they were actually doing idolatry and I'm not actually God. So just as we see in the Quran where it says that their partners will talk to them and they're all gathered together and like all this stuff. Immediately, the nations of the world will gather together and come intermingled with each other, and every nation will enter with their scholars. Now, if you read this in the Quran, we actually have that when all the people are coming before him, they have their imams in front of them. They have their leaders, their scholars, their teachers. So every single nation will come as one group, independent of the other nations, and they'll have their scholar come, and then God will do both individual judgment and corporeal judgment on groups. And this is coming from the Jews. Nations will say before God, Master of the universe, did you give us the Torah and we did not accept it? This is talking about the Gentiles. Since we never received the Torah, why are we being judged for not fulfilling its law? This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, took the Torah around to every nation and those who spoke every language. So the idea of a prophet being sent to all peoples in their own language with the Kitab, here you go. This is actually in of it. And this is actually, if you read the whole section, the whole context, it becomes more explicit. Again, I just try to fit everything on one page. But the idea that every single nation group got a prophet in their own language with the book in their own language, that is from the Talmud. So Muhammad just stole that. Master of the universe, did you overturn the mountain above us like a basin, and we still did not accept the Torah, as you did for the Jewish people? In Surah 263, one of the testable stolen things. My Bob's back.
I'm back.
Cause the mountain to tower above you.
You keep going. You've done brilliantly, Chris.
Yeah. So we have here again, like just obvious copying. Like this is like, hey, there's a mountain picked up above the Jews, held over them, and then God orders them like, hey, you're going to accept this book or you're going to die. And then the Gentiles are arguing like, hey, God, that was rude of you to do. And then they backslid, and then he eventually slaughtered them all. The same things happen in Islam. So this section of the Talmud itself, if you just want to read one of them, read this one, and you will see how obvious. You also get that God is not a tyrant on the day of judgment, and that there is a test for those who didn't receive revelation. There will be a test of fire, a test of heat. In Islam, they have the test of he gathers some of the flame of Gehenna, puts it in front of them, and they are to willingly walk into the flame of Gehenna. If they willingly walk into it, obeying Allah, they'll be entered into paradise. If they don't willingly enter into it, he'll grab them by the ankles into the fire, and they'll go down to hell. You have a similar thing with people making tabernacles and sitting under the heat of the sun. So a brilliant, intense heat will be on them. They'll be burning alive, and they have to withstand it for, I think it was a couple months or a year. If they can do that, they'll be entered into paradise. Otherwise, they'll go down into hell if they like kick their tent, which is pretty interesting. Anyway, so you have all of those specifics, and it's much deeper than I'm presenting here. Like, imagine how deep we went for Joseph, add some more things to it, and then do that for every prophet in the Quran. They're all that deep. Some of them are way more deep, like Solomon. Solomon actually has like 40 pages of text from the Rabbinics that are copied inside of the Quran. It's pretty incredible. So when we talk about like the Quran and the Tafsir and the Hadith are stealing from the Jews, they're not just stealing from the Jews. They're just, it's the religion. You could even call Islam a Jewish cult with how insane it is. It's amazing. So I have a list of things that are stolen, and I'm going to go through based on the type of thing that is stolen. I'm not going to read out all of them. I might point out specific ones that I think are interesting. But for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to read all of these. The scales of justice are pretty interesting because it has the same language. If you read this section of Rosh Hashanah as well, this is another good one to see. Because God tilts the scales to make it easier for people to get into the garden, and it's the exact same language being used in the Quran. You also get the black faces on the Day of Judgment. All of those things, like all of it is just, and eschatology itself, Judgment Day, is around 30% of the Quran is talking about the resurrection, hellfire, or Judgment Day. So just 30% of the Quran automatically, just based on judgment and eschatology, is rabbinic. And then 25% of the Quran is stories of the prophets and of the Bible, but deeply twisted. And so just those two things together is already 55% of the Quran is stolen from the Jews and Christians. But then you go through some of the other beliefs, which we'll get to in a bit, and it just becomes overwhelming how much is stolen. The 4 rivers, including the material that each river is made out of, is stolen from both Second Enoch and also the Apocalypse of Paul, which is a Christian homily, which matches Second Enoch pretty well. The fruits of heaven, even Houris, the idea of Houris, that's coming from the Avesta, it's coming from Zoroastrianism, including the age of being a teenager or a young child. So the age of your Houris are also from Zoroastrianism mixed with rabbinic beliefs on intercourse. But the majority position within Judaism is that intercourse doesn't actually happen in the Garden of Eden in the resurrection, and that you're not going to be eating or drinking or any of that stuff, and you're just going to be standing around in the presence of God. But we do have Moses Maimonides, Rambam, talking about how there was a sect of people who did believe that it was going to be a flesh-driven, intercourse-driven, food-driven, wine-driven belief system of paradise. So you do have it in the Jewish sources that the Islamic heaven is also, it could be Jewish. He could have gotten that from the Jews mixed with the Persians, the Zoroastrians. Hellfire, including the punishments of like eating the fruit of the tree, and the lote tree, sleeping, death, resurrection, Jabril being the one who gives prophecy to people. He gives knowledge to people, including teaching language to people. That comes in the Talmud and in the rabbinic sources. All of the demonology, including Allah not liking even numbers, so you have to do everything in odd times. Like if you wipe yourself, you have to wipe yourself an odd number of times. That comes from the rabbis. There's actually this whole section in Peschaim 109b through 112a. This is again like 50 pages of text. All of this is Islamic. This is where they get their beliefs on jinn and demons and all of that. It's insane. I did a 5-hour stream on just reading this and going through the demonology of rabbinic Judaism and comparing it to Islam. So if you want to have a good laugh and go through how ridiculous it is, I have a 5-hour stream on just that topic. We also have the Quran created before the universe, or the Torah created before the universe. He uses the Torah to create all things, all future events, because rabbis were determinists. So the idea of qadar, of predestination, all that stuff is also rabbinic. The prophets and all nations, prophecy, the names of God, like Ar-Rahman, that comes from Rahman, and that's actually one of the titles of the Jewish God in Yemen, in the Abyssinian Empire. So in Ethiopia and in modern day Yemen, you have some of the titles of Allah, specifically Ar-Rahman, which is the first title of Allah until he switches to Allah permanently. You have that in the Talmud, just explicitly. He's called Ar-Rahman, the merciful one. Several of the names of Allah is actually within Bereshit Rabbah and the Talmud, including the way that they talk about it. They talk about like God acquiring attributes in time, and one attribute trumping another attribute, like his attribute of justice was trumped by his attribute of mercy, and then vice versa, depending on if the person was righteous or not. He would trump one attribute with another attribute. Because they're not Trinitarian, they don't have the cross to solve those problems. So they just are arbitrary with which attribute of God is being applied actively at that point in time. Kind of like Allah. So you have that. And then the sperm drop idea, abrogation. Even the Kaaba, you can make a case for Abraham. It's a much weaker case, but you can make a case for it. And then the apostate laws, including killing of apostates, is found in the Talmud, you have the Divine Council, and all that. So a lot of their theologies are straight up ripped. You also have their stories being straight up ripped. So him being super tall, him being one person with Eve, then split in two, Iblis refusing to prostrate. Huh?
No, in terms of Adam, because for a minute there, I thought you were talking about Muhammad.
Oh, no. Yeah, about Adam, yes. Animals being made in pairs explicitly, and angels being rebuked, like them rebuking God, like, why are you going to make God whenever he's going to sin and cause mischief in the land? And like, how do you, all this stuff, super, Cain burying Abel, and this is Surah 531. And then 532 quotes the Talmud. So in 531, you have a story that's taken from the rabbinic sources, and then the next verse is quoting the Mishnah and then saying that God revealed the Mishnah to the Jews. So it's pretty, Surah 5 is incredible for how much it uses the rabbinic sources. Noah, Abraham, all of this. The smashing idols is quite a lot of the Quran as well.
Chris, before you go on, obviously, and thankfully, you could probably go on for 4 hours quite easily.
Yes.
And thank you so much for being patient with me and soldering on while I was having IT problems of all different kinds. Basically, my computer crashed. It decided it was going to do an update midstream, and that crashed it because it's an old computer, and it's clearly on its last legs. But I'm just thinking, in the last sort of 20 minutes, do you maybe want to take questions from the audience?
Yeah, we can. I was just going to quickly click through all these so people can take screenshots if they want. But yeah, we can take questions from the audience.
I think if you were going to do these these screens in the last 20 minutes, right, you wouldn't have been able to do them justice.
Right. I do have one more slide after this that I want to give, actually.
Do you want to go to the slide that you want to give?
Yeah, so it's this one and this one.
Right, you go to those two and give those two.
Okay. So the Talmud isn't the only source for the Quran. We also have all these other sources as well. And how much of the Quran is actually stolen? What I've counted so far is, on a safe estimate, you have 60 to 70% of the Quran is stolen. A more aggressive estimate is anywhere from 75 to 85%, which is why I typically say like 80% of the Quran is stolen. We could just say like 70 to 80% is stolen from the Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Persians, Greeks, Gnostics, pagans, Manichaeisms, Yemen, like all that stuff. So the vast majority of the content is stolen. And these are the things I found that are actually original to Muhammad. So things like killing dogs and severing the aorta of false prophets and the satanic verses and jizya and slaves and child marriage. All that stuff is what is actually original to Muhammad. The biographical material is original to Muhammad, and all the rest of it isn't. And then I have the argument for the Bayesian. And this is the chance that Islam is true mathematically using a Bayesian approach. So this little black dot right here, if you can see that on your screen, that little black dot, if you were to throw a dart on this dartboard and you hit it, that's the chance of getting the Quran being made by God based on the Bayesian argument that I have. So that's it. But
okay, so what we're going to do, guys,
make a video on that.
So I mean, there's still a chance, Chris, that my my internet might fail. But if I disappear again, just feel free to go. You have done your job excellently, and I'll just close the live stream as soon as I get back on. Okay. But in the meantime, if there are any questions for Chris or myself on the topic, obviously Chris is the presenter here, so it'd be good. Just put at Bob. And if there are any questions.
Yeah, so Prophet Yafel asks, what sort of pushback do Muslims give you? Typically, it's one of like 3 responses. It's the Talmud actually comes after the Quran.
It did actually continue.
Oh, it might be crashing again.
You still there, Chris?
Yeah, I'm here.
Brilliant. So I was noting a couple of things.
Okay.
And one of the things that I noted when you were doing the presentation is that a lot of what appears in the Talmud is obviously legal opinions. and this looks very much like Islamic fiqh. I don't know if you're aware of Islamic fiqh and the manuals.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And it's clear that Islam is just a DIY version of Judaism. It is a copy and paste Frankenstein's mess version of Judaism. Everything down to the legal schools, the legal opinions, and these books of fiqh reflect what you're seeing in the Talmud. So it looks like we've got our first question in. That was one of my thoughts, and I'll give out more of my thoughts if the questions look a bit slow. So let's see if this question comes up. So, okay, not actually a question. Okay.
Professor Yoffel gave a question earlier.
There we go. What sort of pushback from Muslims do you get? So let us know.
Yeah. So we get that the Quran comes before the Talmud. The Talmud is influenced by it, which is obviously nonsense whenever you go through the actual arguments for the dating of the Talmud. You get also that, oh, well, all these stories are actually just from prophets, and the Jews just faithfully preserved it up until that point. And then you're saying, oh, well, the Mishnah isn't actually from God. You can actually make the argument that it was invented in the 200s BC by rabbis, and that it didn't exist before that point. We have in the Bible itself references to entire generations not having the Torah in general, let alone the oral Torah. And if the oral Torah, like if no Torah was believed during that period of time, how could the oral Torah survive for 3 generations if no one believed, no one even knew that the Torah existed, so much to the point where King Josiah was unaware of its existence entirely. They found it by accident inside the temple while cleaning. So you can say, oh, well, even if there was an oral culture given at Sinai, it did not preserve until today, because it would have been lost during that period before Josiah. And then you can also make the case that even if the Mishnah is from Sinai, the Gemara isn't. We know exactly when rabbis invented it, how they invented it, and all that stuff. You'll have some people pushing back and be like, oh, no, you don't actually, it's just surface level. It's not actually being copied. That's just surface level stuff. And then you compare the Arabic to the Hebrew, and it's like, oh, those are the same words. And then you can like Shekhinah, it's like that word shouldn't exist in the Quran, but it does. And you go through the tafsir, and they literally quote the Talmud to explain it, including like Ibn Abbas a bunch of times, Abu Huraira. So you have those are the main defenses they use. And the fourth one, which I get way less often, thankfully, is like threats. Like, so, not too many threats so far, but I have gotten them over this. But those 3 are typically what I get pushed back on. And then just nonsense claims of like whataboutisms of, oh, well, Paul copies from these apocryphal sources and Jude copies from these apocryphal sources. Therefore, the Bible is also false by your standard. And it's like, well, first off, this argument could be given by an atheist. You can just say Christianity and Islam are both false for doing so. So that doesn't actually get you as a Muslim out of the argument if you make that argument. That doesn't solve the problem. You're still in the problem of my book is stolen from humans. So how do you deal with that? Attacking Christianity is not solving the problem. It's just,
and I think there is an important difference that we've got to make here in our understanding of Revelation. Muslims are saying that the Quran is literally the words of Allah. So if Allah is literally plagiarizing other people's words and then passing them off as his own, that's quite different from a biblical understanding of a Christian understanding of the Bible, which is that these are the words of men inspired by the Spirit of God. And men borrow from one another's writings all the time, to make their points. That's a very human thing to do. The point is, if the Spirit is inspired to reframe or recapture or represent something, and I've got no particular passage in mind here at all. Like, maybe Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he's using an early creed from the church, and he's representing it in his letter. Or the fact that in the book of Acts, there's a letter that is sent out from the Council of Jerusalem that appears in the book of Acts. Well, that's obviously
Mhm.
a copy, because that's not Luke's words, it's the council's words. So, this kind of use of other material is a very human thing to do, and can fall quite easily within our remit and understanding of Scripture, because we're not claiming that Scripture is literally the words of God in the same way that Muslims are. Your thoughts on that?
Yes. Oh, man, that's absolutely right. Even if like later scribes like added things to the text, we can, we have textual criticism to find back what the regional reconstruction of the Greek was. The Arabic, if you say that the Hafs Quran is the true Quran given by Muhammad, faithfully preserved by Uthman, you have to deal with the fact that in that view, Muhammad gave man-made material as if it's true and as if it's from God. You have to deal with that as a Muslim. And it's not just once or twice, it's 100, 150 at least times this is happening in very great detail. So you can't just like hand wave this away. No, you have to deal with this problem. Did Muhammad get this from Allah? If he did, why is Allah plagiarizing people with false stories, false narratives like semen coming from between the backbone and the ribs? That's from Greeks.
Yeah.
Dual Karnain, not being a pagan, that's from Jews and Syriac.
Or the seven sleepers of Ephesus.
Seven sleepers of Ephesus. Yeah.
I mean, for me, that's
so many.
That's a good one, because it's obviously a post-Jesus narrative. It's a post-Jesus story. The very story itself tells you that it is post the Christ event, and yet, I mean, I know Orthodox, some, if not probably most Orthodox Christians take it as a true story. I personally don't. I don't think it's believed outside of the Orthodox world. It's clearly a Christian fable, for pious reasons, maybe, but maybe, a good Christian fiction story for its time and place. And it is there in the Quran as if it's a fact,
Right.
Have you looked at that one as part of your studies on this?
Yeah. So I had that in one of the slides for what wasn't stolen from it. I have Gog and Magog. Like a lot of those are just straight up copied. So also the Jesus and the Gnostic stuff for like marrying the palm tree, speaking from a cradle, making clay birds. All of that is also stolen. Hori's Muta marriage comes from Persians, Babylonians. The mixing of the fluids, the two fluids theory, that comes from the Greeks. And even the Queen of Sheba being worshipped as the sun. So in Surah 27, Queen of Sheba worships the sun. That's an anachronism. At the time of Solomon in the 10th century BC, they were worshiping the moon, Omaka. And that was their chief deity. It was the moon god, the male moon god. The worship of Shamash, the female sun, didn't start up until like the 2nd century AD. Right before they were conquered, or right around the time, well, it's like 100 BC to around 200, 300 AD. They were conquered by Jews. There was a Jewish king of Himyar, and that king actually is in the Quran. Funny enough, he's in Surah 85. And in that surah, it says that the evil king burned the faithful believers in the trench. That is a story of the king of Himyar burning Miaphysite Christians, Oriental Orthodox Christians, in the trench in Naran. So in the city of Naran, there was all that stuff happening. Anyway.
And I think one of the questions that sort of leaps to my mind, because there's not many questions coming through on the chat. So there's two questions, and I don't know if in 10 minutes we're going to get through them. But the first one is, obviously, a defeater to your argument would be to prove that the Talmud has copied Islamic stories. And I know you did touch on this in terms of the dating of the Talmud, but what evidentially, if there is evidences, like, can you summarize in a key points, like 3 or 4 points, or as many as you can, that would demonstrate that these Talmudic stories predate the Quran and it's not going the other way? And I know you did touch on it, but just sort of summarizing sort of brute force facts, demonstrable things that show that it's one-way traffic.
Right. Well, first off, one of the primary defeaters is it's not just the Talmud he's copying from. He's also copying from other Jewish sources like Second Enoch and not Cave of Treasures, but like Second Enoch and Book of Jubilees. Those predate Jesus, or like date to the time of Jesus, and we know that for sure. So he's quoting material that predates Islam by centuries. So you already have that. Like, even if it does it at all, the Quran is false. But the fact it does it hundreds of times or in thousands of ayah, literally like around
But a key
5,000
part
ayah.
to your argument is that there's no prophet between
Talmud.
Jesus
Right.
Jesus and Muhammad. So it's more those
Right.
stories in that period that I'm concerned
Yes.
about, because they'll explain. They'll try and explain what you've just said, the pre-Jesus stories as, well, that was a prophet.
Right. You can't do that for Jacob of Sarug. We know when he lived. You can't do that for the Cave of Treasures. We know when it was written. You can't do that for the Apocalypse of Abraham. We know when that was written. You can't do that for Second Enoch, because that's 180. So there's a bunch of stories that are not, you just can't do it for, that are early enough that we have people talking about it and making commentaries on it before the Quran. But the Talmud itself appears to be, there's one scholar right now that is saying that it actually was made in 450 or so AD, because it seems to be alluding to and competing with the Jerusalem Talmud, which we have a firm date of 400 AD4. So we have that there is a dozen or so early independent witnesses that the end of the writing of the Talmud was around 500 AD, 500 to 514. We have a dozen or so references to that in the 600s, 700s, 800s, 900s AD. So we have all these rabbis, all these scholars, historians, even non-Jewish historians, talking about the Talmud at that time. And there's even commentaries written in the 600s on the Talmud. So we have, the book obviously exists if there's commentaries written on it. Then also the Talmud doesn't have any influences of Islam in it or of Arabic. The fact it has 0 Arabic loanwords when every other post-Muhammad Jewish work has Arabic loanwords is like a dead giveaway that it is before. That's why all scholars now actually date it beforehand. For a long time, they were dating it in the 800s and 900s. And then the more we examined it and did textual criticism, we realized, oh no, we have a much better case for an earlier recension around the beginning of the 6th century, if not the very end or middle of the 5th century. So you have multiple attestation, you have no Arabic, and you have the culture that it's competing with was also at that time period.
Yeah, because without that counter, without that defeater, it's a pretty solid case. Right. And then the sort of next question that leaps to my mind is just the sheer vastness of material that's being borrowed and put into the Quran, to me suggests, and the cut and paste nature of the Quran, to me suggests that because the Islamic literature does suggest that there were different periods of editing and revision to the Quranic text. That there was an original Quran that was brought about by someone who was at least entitled Muhammad, if not given the title Muhammad, was called Muhammad, and he brought something of a revelation. But then it seems to me that there was an early editorial work done on the Quran, which I think the Islamic Hadith literature supports that idea under one of the successors to Muhammad, in which maybe even more material was put in, because there is a vastness to the amount of material that we found just being copied, or it just could be that Muhammad had a really good memory.
Could be. Again, he gets things mostly right. The Quran appears to be a rabbinic paraphrase flavored with Gnostic, Zoroastrian, Manichaean, Christian homilies. So it's not just rabbinic. It's a bunch of other things too, but it's mostly rabbinic, and it's mostly a paraphrase and a shortening of the thing. So like if you compare Surah 27 to the Targum of Targum Shinai, the second Targum of Esther, the story on the Queen of Sheba it's beat for beat exactly the same, but all of the details are lesser in the Quran, as if he is giving a summary, as if you're familiar with the story already. So a lot of the times when the author of the Quran is writing these things, it almost seems like he's assuming the reader, the audience is familiar with the stories, which is why I think whenever he gives the story of, oh, I'm illiterate, I've never read these stories, but I'm preserving it and giving it to you in pure Arabic as a way to authenticate himself. He's saying, hey, you know these stories by heart. I'm teaching them to you in Arabic faithfully. Therefore, you should believe me as a prophet. The problem is it's not actually the Torah. It's rabbinic material that's not from God, but from man. And he doesn't know the difference between the two.
And plus,
he's using that as the proof of himself.
And plus, the mainstay of the Islamic story, if it is to be believed, is that Muhammad spent the biggest part of the Quran was revealed in Medina. You know, and so it would not be difficult to get hold of these stories in Medina. You know, and obviously to try and argue to the Jews, you know, bear in mind, it's quite possible that the Jews themselves were the ones saying, "You're just repeating these stories," you know, like you have heard this story from the synagogue just last Saturday. Now here you are telling us again. We just told you that. Big ear, you know. So
it's interesting. Whenever you look at the Medinan surahs, the way he talks changes. It's less poetic and it's more argumentative. He's doing dialogue, he's doing debate with the Jews there. So he actually adopts more of the Talmudic style of arguing for the Medinan surahs. And even in the Meccan surahs, you get a bunch of content that is obviously Jewish, including Surah 96, like the first surah revealed. I think it's the pen. Surah 96 is the first one revealed, where he's like recite and the cave demon chokes him. That has rabbinic influences in it. So even at the very beginning, before he starts his ministry, he's already steeped, because he's like in his 50s, he's steeped in the knowledge of rabbinic Judaism and Christian homilies already before he starts. So it wasn't only Medina that influenced him, but once he hits Medina, the amount of parallels and the amount of specific stories that are stolen exponentially increases. You get the longest surahs, and you get surahs that are just beat after beat after beat copying these stories in very, very explicitly rabbinic ways.
So and Gabriel Reynolds, you know, he makes a strong argument that the Quran's interaction with Christians indicates that there is a Christian community operating, not just in the edges of the Arabian Peninsula, but in the heartland of the Arabian Peninsula, you know, and certainly even if there wasn't a settled community of Christians like there was in Najaf, there would have still been Christian traders passing through. Because if you've got a settled community, then traders again emanate out from that community, aren't they? You know, and
their stories are going to go with them, their culture is going to go with them.
Exactly. And so I think Arabia was probably perforated with Jewish and Christian stories that even pagans knew, even if they weren't Jewish or Christian, you know.
Same with Persian and Greek.
So
melting pot.
Christou, I've just got to say, you've done excellently. Thank you. It's the first time I've had the experience of watching my own live stream and being unable to participate. So I think it is definitely time maybe to consider buying a new computer, because this one is definitely, I've had it nearly 10 years. You know.
Oh wow.
I think exactly, you know. So it's not like I'm just willy-nilly going out and buying a new computer every 2 years. But it really is in parts being held up by sellotape, and that's not an exaggeration, that's an actual fact. But thank you so much for hosting my show.
There was a comment, I don't know if you saw it, he was like, I'm glad this didn't happen whenever you were on with the Muslim last week. So
oh no, that was a rule. He's just a sectarian Christian who's
okay.
Who's still salty.
But can you imagine if you had like a live call-in stream and one of your Muslim guests joins, then you leave and he just has your stream
that would be a nightmare.
20 minutes.
If anything makes me want to buy a new computer, it's that thought. Right, yes, that's a really good point. Anyway, there's obviously going to be some Muslims who are listening to this who are a bit more open-minded, a bit more fair-minded, genuine, sincere, seekers after truth, people who are willing to go where the facts lead them and think for themselves. Now, you can't help the hard-headed Dawagandists, you know, they're just in it for the grift and the propaganda and the fame. But not every Muslim's like that. There are genuine truth seekers who will listen to this presentation. As a closing statement, what would you like to say to those people?
So I have around 18 hours of this material available on my YouTube. And also for those asking in the comments, at the beginning of the stream, I put up a QR code for the full Google Doc where I have a lot of these sources. It's unfinished, but it has enough sources. It has hundreds of pages of sources. I have already had several Muslims tell me that they left Islam because of this knowledge, this information, including one of them that gave his life to Christ on stream with me, giving his testimony, which was pretty special.
Thanks,
you can go watch that video. Yeah, I had to obscure his voice because he had to flee his country because of death threats. But he gave his life to Christ because of this material, and so can you. This is obviously true. This is the more we go into this, by the time the book comes out I'm going to demonstrate that this is just obviously true, that the Quran is man-made. You don't have to become an atheist. You can just come to Christ. We have a true loving God, Yahweh, who cares for you enough to die for you, to redeem you, to have a relationship with you. And let this knowledge penetrate you. Let it go past your gates, your walls, the blockades that you've been taught to have, and actually deal with this information. Actually critically think and examine this information and see if it's true or not. Go through all the examples. Don't just go through one example, be like, and give up. No. Seriously, because this is not a game. This is your eternal soul we are talking about here. And right now, as a Muslim, I believe you are on a path to hellfire, and you need to critically think, really think about what you believe, why you believe it, and if it's true. And hopefully you will see that it's not, and then come to Christ.
Brilliant. So, thank you so much. Would you like to close us in a psalm of prayer? If you just want to read one of the psalms as to close us in prayer.
Sure. I was going to do 117, which is the shortest, but you don't need to do that.
You can do if you want. Whichever one you want.
Oh, sure. Why not? Okay. 117. Praise Yahweh, all you nations. Laud him, all peoples, for his loving kindness prevails over us, and the truth of Yahweh is everlasting. Hallelujah.
This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Amen.
Thank you, Chris. I hope everybody enjoyed it. As you can see, Chris 2 is definitely making a storm to become Chris number 1 in the apologetics world. So Chris number 1's got some competition. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you, and a brilliant host of Bob of Speaker's Corner channel. Second only to myself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good night and God bless. If you want to wait in the back, Chris, we'll just have a quick catch up after we've done.